My name is Liam Kanenga and I am your host. This week we're making a continuance around the discussion of Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2. And to do this discussion, I'm joined by a human rights defender and a human rights expert, the Zimbabwe National Students Union coordinator, as well as a former student leader, Mr. Samuel Gwenzi. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you for hosting me to your show.
The Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 was brought into motion by the Zimbabwean government early last year and then further assented into law last week by the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Amongst the clauses of Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 include 1. The one to do with the appointment of judges without public interviews. Secondly, the deposition of the running mate clause, and then the extension of the women and youth quota systems. And to discuss this, like I said, I'm joined by Samuel Gwenzi. So Samuel, what's your perspective on the appointment of judges without public interviews?
Yeah, thank you very much, Liam. I think the main aspect on the aspect of the judiciary is the aspect of separation of powers. And the current amendment seeks to retrogress the democratic processes that has started with the liberation struggle, that has started with the people-driven constitution, which started in 1997 through the formation of the National Constitutional Assembly, and the 2013 election, after the 2013 constitutional making process. So this is a vindication of the very processes that has brought the constitution to this extent. So this is a threat to the judiciary and aspect of separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary.
The of major interest is who stands to gain more and who stands to lose much after such an inaction of law.
We all lose as Zimbabweans because the constitution is the supreme law. The constitution is sacrosanct. And currently the citizens of Zimbabwe are at a great loss due to the current amendments that have been facilitated by the ruling party in government currently. And it seeks to retrogress back to the Mugabe era, where there was, or the Lancaster House, where there was powers into the executive, into the president. So currently we have actually retrogressed as a nation, and actually it also brings fallacy to our government and to our parliament, our senate, and actually to the current leadership who consider themselves as the new dispensation, who have gone back to the archaic period where they would want to create a monarch in a president. So the nation, the president, and actually the citizens themselves, they're at a great loss due to these amendments that has been facilitated by Parliament through motions from ZANU-PF.
Okay, so how much influence does partisan politics have on this amendment bill? Is it a partisan agenda or it's just an issue of political gains on the part of the representatives?
Yeah, it may be partisan, but if you look at the voting processes towards these amendments, you can actually see that some elements of the opposition actually voted for this, especially in Pali. And in Senate, only 5 opposition legislators voted against, which speaks clearly to that it has been a team of individuals that seeks to consolidate power by the current regime in terms of ZANU-PF and its surrogates, some of the elements within the opposition in Pali. It has been a process that culminated through the expulsion of the biggest political party, which is the MDC Alliance. And I think this was the process to ensure that if the MDC is chucked out of Pali, then it will give room for the consolidation of power by the ruling party. So I think it's individualistic, it's selfish, it seeks to consolidate power into a single individual more than it seeks to bring justice, is to bring democracy, development to the nation. It's mostly to do with power.
Okay, yeah. While on that issue of power, what could Emerson Mnangagwa be running away from, especially when he's consolidating power and centering upon himself alone?
Yeah, basically, it shows the nature and crisis that we inherited after the 2017 coup. So it's a full culmination of patronage politics, patronage systems, where the Chief Justice helped the coup government to take over power in an unconstitutional process. So currently they are giving back to some elements within the judiciary who helped the current regime to take over power illegally. So for me, it's a payback time. It's a crisis that we have and we inherited in 2017, and those key elements have been highlighted by various players of late to say the only way that we could change the status quo of a constitutional crisis that we find ourselves in is firstly to challenge the legality through the process that has been done by the Human Rights NGO Forum and the Zimbabwe Young Lawyers Network. And it doesn't just fall on those kind of trips. I think the citizens need to also come on board and defend the Constitution. The whole game has to return back to the basics, where the citizens' power becomes supreme by defending the Constitution.
Okay, and then now let's move on to the extension of the women's quota and the youth quota. We see a connotation of inclusivity here, but to what extent can that be worth celebrating, given that there are many other clauses that do not sit well with the citizens?
The two key amendments seems progressive because they speaks to young people, to the marginalized members of society like women and youth, and probably they left the disabled and stuff. But these key amendments need to be re-evaluated, whether they, in the last 2 terms, they have managed to reach or to address those kind of historical challenges of women in power or youth in decision-making process. But we find that what we need is a holistic change, structural change, more than piecemeal kind of processes, such as the current amendments in terms of participation of women and youth. I think the Constitution is very clear, but to do it in a more empowerment and quota system, for me, it's not much more progressive. It sounds like we are just identifying a few young men to be on the feeding trough who may not speak to the issues of women or speak to the issues of the youth.
Okay, yeah, still on that issue to do with inclusion, these quota systems are limited to people affiliated to political parties, last time I checked. How then can we call them inclusive, given that independent people, non-affiliating people can't be included?
It may be very difficult that our process in Zimbabwe is a political or party or a contestation of processes in terms of political power, and I think what it gives is to say our politics needs to change to ensure that there is a full participation of youth and women within the political space. I think we need to create a space where women participate in politics and where youth also participate in politics, not just being used, but also to become policy players, to become candidates, and key processes like that. So our country needs to create an environment, and I think what we need to be fighting for is to have an environment where young people feel obliged to participate in democratic processes like election and to be chosen, and to also participate in party-related politics. because you can't expect to be part and parcel of the process when you are not part and parcel of the political processes, like being either a part of National Constitutional Assembly or part of MDC Alliance or part of ZANU-PF. So I think people need to identify themselves. If they fail to identify themselves within the party processes and they believe that they are better candidates to usher the country forward, they also have got that liberty as independent candidates. So I think it's high time that they don't give power to just individuals within the party processes, but they also need to join these political parties.
Okay, so to you, it's a matter of strategic positioning. It's no longer, we can't agonize on the basis that some others choose not to affiliate, but they have to strategically position themselves for the best of their own good, if I'm getting you correct.
Yeah, and there is a process already. People can choose to become independent players.
Okay.
So if you feel that you can't relate to the various political parties in the country, then basically it's either you have to form one or you're supposed to be an independent player. And I think it's high time that if you believe you have got the qualities to tap and move the country forward. For me, it's not about joining political parties or having non-people that are non-partisan to be also involved in governance, like becoming member of parliaments or councillors. But it's about creating an enabling environment where young people also participate in political parties. And I think there has to be measures in the constitution to ensure that there is that enabling environment. And where necessary, the civic society also need to create a platform where they check and balance the various political parties to see how they relate and push the issues or the participation of youth and women or any other marginalized group in the political matrix.
Okay. And then the other issue is you spoke about leaving out disabled people. What's your take really in terms of the inclusion of disabled people if we are to ever allow such a law into the constitution?
I think there's already the aspect where there is a Senate who is supposed to come from the disabled position, though I'm not quite so sure which allegiance and party does these marginalized groups will be affiliated to. But I think there is need to have much more discussion in terms of not just in Parly and Council, but also in boards to ensure that there is a full inclusion. Or actually also in the executive today, we need to look at how many women are in the executive currently who are ministers in Mnangagwa's cabinet. And also to see how many boards, our key parastatal boards, and what's the number of women, what's the number of disabled, what's the number of youth in all these kind of processes. We need to ensure that there's a full inclusion so that the aspect of the marginalized become part and process of the Zimbabwean political and economic systems.
Okay. And then also there's the issue of the running mate clause. Removing the running mate clause, meaning that the president now will take upon power to appoint vice presidents. What would that mean for democracy in Zimbabwe?
I think we have had a challenge during the Mugabe's era on who is able to take over post-Mugabe.
Yes.
Or the aspect of ensuring solving the succession politics.
Yes.
And the 2013 constitution, our current constitution, created the running mate clause to ensure that it addresses the aspect of constitutional crisis that may be in existence after the death or after some elements where the current incumbent may not be able to take over, to be in power. So we find it as a means to just consolidate power into an individual, which is actually dangerous for democracy. We have seen it in Mugabe's period. And right now, Mnangagwa is retrogressing to that kind of space. So the running mate clause seeks to consolidate power into an individual and will create a crisis such as the one that we got in 2017, where the military or other elements of shenanigans gets into the political matrix. So the running mate clause is, it has been a progressive element to ensure that we have got a running mate, but that's what our government has tried to amputate our constitution in taking it off, and it's retrogressive, according to me.
Okay, and then of much concern in a broader perspective is the issue to do with section 328 of the constitution, which says that Senate and the House of Assembly and the government themselves, they can't really put a law into practice unless it secures maximum public support. And then last year we saw public hearings where people were heavily speaking against these constitutional amendments, but then they've proceeded, the government has proceeded. So the question is, does the people's voice still matter in terms of lawmaking in Zimbabwe, in as far as Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 is concerned?
We have an authoritarian government which doesn't respect the rule of law. And this is a manifestation, like I say, of the 2017 coup of individuals that don't respect the constitution. Except probably we get a remedy in the first constitutional amendment, number 1, which was dismissed by the High Court because it was not procedural and it was non-constitutional. And currently we have got these processes where in section 328 it clearly specifies on the procedures that needs to be undertaken to ensure the amendment of the constitution. Like what I highlighted first is that the constitution is supreme and it's not any other law that can easily be amended. It's something that has to go through a full process of people's consent, because the constitution, when it's people driven, then the people are supposed to be the individuals that are supposed to be key towards these amendments. And in terms of amending the constitution, in terms of the judges, the separation of power, it's clear that there is need to have an amendment. Of course, they are playing with the names like age limit or the tenure and stuff like that. But procedurally, it speaks volumes to the government that fails to adhere to constitutional principles and to the respect of the constitution.
Yeah. You mentioned something to do with age limits, especially to do with the judges, the High Court and Constitutional Court judges. What matters the most in your perspective here, especially when we want to maintain, procedural accurateness in terms of appointments? What matters the most here? Is it the term limit or the age limit?
I think both speaks well to what is needed, because the age limit speaks to the time where it has been seen that a person may not be effective during probably the current state where 70 years is the age limit. It speaks to when a person is no longer in his prime state to undertake. Of course, you may look at the American constitution that even have people that are above the age of 83. But in our case, we have state as 70 as the age limit. But all of them, they speaks well, because it has been verified that when you are above 70, you will not be able to fully engage yourself. Even the term limit also speaks to say we have got a greater pool of competent people that can also become judges or become constitutional judges. So the aspect of term limits is also key, that a person serves during his own particular term and leave. So both of them, they speaks well to efficiency of our judiciary.
Okay, and then now let's look at what it means for the opposition, human rights defenders, especially now with the issue of having the president being able to appoint judges and also being able to fire them, because once you get power to appoint, you can also get the power to fire. So what does it really mean in terms of that, because it's not just about paying back people that helped him get the coup, but it also has a certain voice. It speaks to other interested parties outside his sphere of association.
Yeah, I've been following more of your shows, and they have been speaking to the shrinking democratic space in the country. And one of it was the aspect of the independence of the judiciary. And I think the current constitutional crisis that actually is in existence, and the amendments that have been proposed by government, speaks to a shrinking democratic space. And most of the human rights defenders currently have been persecuted through the use of the courts and the law. And that is not a rule of law, but rule by law, which the current judiciary pushed through. So for me, it's a tough time for human rights defenders and to citizens who also believe in their constitution that we have regressed as a nation, and the democratic space continue to shrink. It's a culmination of the spaces where currently we have got nearly 75 students since the period of January up to now who have been arrested, tortured, and abducted. We have various civic society leaders, and I think the cases emanate to around 300 from January to now from your statistics, who have been vindicated by the judiciary in one way or the other. The pre-trial detentions of various individuals, and the look at the Hopio's case, the Mako's case, and Takuzwa Ngadzore, this Naso president's case. All these cases speaks to a judiciary that has been partisan, and they have become judiciary activists in support of the current regime. So I think the judiciary has the current amendments to the judiciary speaks to the growing shrinking space in the country.
Okay, and then as a solution, what do you recommend be done by citizens as well as by key stakeholders in various spaces of Zimbabwean governance?
I think basically it may be an unpopular position, but ZANU-PF needs to be stopped, because it is the furnace of dealing with all these amendments. It needs to be stopped in its tracks, and we need to cure the 2017 coup in itself, because it's actually a culmination of the 2017 coup by Mnangagwa and the military. And currently the best way that we can do that is to have legitimate election, not the 2018 elections, where actually it speaks to how the judiciary responded to the illegitimacy of the 2018 elections. It also speaks to the hand of how after the 2018 election, nearly 9 bodies were shot by the military. So all of these aspects speaks to a fractured system in itself, which needs to be cured. And it speaks now to bringing citizens at the heart of the country's governance. And elections are also one of the critical elements. Many people need to register in the coming 2023 elections. And also they need to have a scale up of citizens drive or people-driven kind of processes to stop the current processes that are happening. My also advice is to return back to the basics of the kind formation of the people as working in, which culminated to the fight for the constitution. So, citizens from civic society, students, labor, political parties need to come together and fight the beast in its using both the courts as a remedy, but also using also the streets also as a remedy, and also building consciousness in communities of the current crisis that we have in the country. It also speaks to how we have to galvanize international solidarity, where international players also need to speak to the deterioration of the situation at hand. So it's about how we are going to package to the different elements and sectors of our society to ensure that we rescue our country. And the young people must be vigilant enough and to start to speak and to fight for constitutionalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was Samuel Gwenzi, human rights expert and national coordinator of the Zimbabwe National Students Union, as well as a human rights defender, giving us his comments and analytics on Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, and he also gave recommendations, and major of those are: one, that the citizens need to start taking an active part through participating in elections, and that means by stopping the organization sponsoring a Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2. Then secondly, mass mobilization by civic organizations and various political players. But of much note is his comment that a government that took power through unconstitutional means will always find it hard to respect the constitution. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was Into Zimbabwe. My name is Liam Kanenga. I'm always your host. See you next week.